This is my 18th video on my attempts to construct a small 00 gauge layout. See part 1 for my reasons for doing this and my lengthy series on my N-gauge railway modelling for more interesting stuff with trains actually running, etc. This part deals with a variety of items to be placed on and around stations to hopefully bring those stations more to life. I used the Wills and Dapol ex-Airfix plastic sets and a variety of other items. I'd picked up a number of sets and individual items to be added to my stations. For the most part, I was fortunate enough to be able to get these from British model trains in Cambridge, Ontario, just up the road from where I live, thus saving me from having to pay shipping from the UK to Canada. These items had been accumulating in a box waiting to be used, and I figured it was about time to see what I could do with them. I built a couple of stations for my little 00 gauge layout fairly early in the process, see parts 5 and 6 of this series. Both stations used platforms built from the Metcalfe stone platform kit. The first station, shown at right here, used the old Airfix booking hall kit for its building, and the second station used Metcalfe's Settle and Carlisle station buildings, slightly modified. Since I built them, the stations had stayed essentially bare, as seen here. I did build the Dapol Airfix kit for kiosks and platform steps, see part 13, and that gave me a kiosk for each platform and new steps to go behind the Airfix booking hall, as seen here. Now it seemed it was high time to move on to additional details. I had the Wills platform accessories set. As seen here, this comprises 4 sprues of plastic parts and a paper sheet, not decals, with posters, etc. The grey plastic sprues have parts for 2 types of carts and some little machines that I couldn't quite identify. The white parts are for benches, rather in the GWR style, and signs. I also had the Dapol kit, originally Airfix, for platform fittings. This provided plastic parts for 4 lamps, 2 station name signs, 2 benches, and a bunch of station fencing. A sheet of something or other with 2 choices of station name was also provided, and we'll come back to that. I cut the Wills parts from their sprues and cleaned them up as usual with a file and an emery board. There didn't seem to be a lot of assembly involved. Wheels and handles were glued onto the 2 types of carts. The machines were made from 2 parts glued back to back. Not sure what these machines are meant to be. Vending machines of some sort, presumably. The benches were made by gluing strips for seats and back over 3 uprights. It was a rather fiddly process to manage to get all 3 uprights parallel. I deliberately didn't glue the supporting posts onto the station name signs, as I thought it would be best to paint the posts first. There are no supporting posts provided for the other sign backings, and there are also considerably less sign backings than there are signs on the sheet of paper. Here are the assembled Wills items, together with the Dapol lamps glued to their bases, other Dapol items, except for the fencing, which I didn't have an immediate use for, and a couple of extra benches that I had picked up. I didn't want to use the black and white Middleton station name that came on the Wills sheet, so I printed my own name on my PC printer. Humberston was the village nearest to my first childhood home and where I first attended school. I also noticed that the Wills sheet, whilst it did provide small timetables, didn't provide anything for the heading of the timetable boards, so I printed my own London, Midland and Scottish Railway headings, the LMS being the railway my family worked for and what I model in 00 gauge. I sized these items by measuring the spaces where they needed to go on the boards with calipers in inches, and then multiplying that by 600 since I was going to create images with 600 dpi resolution, the highest my printer will support. I could then create rectangles in my graphics program with the correct size in pixels. I'd previously experimented with my printer to find a colour that would come out looking close to LMS Crimson. Here you can see the little LMS headings I printed in place on the timetable boards. I cut out the timetables from the Wills sheet. Unfortunately, Wills didn't seem to have been entirely successful in printing these the right size to fit onto the boards, and I struggled a bit, shaving them down after the first one wouldn't really fit into the board space. Still, the result is not too bad. I now had timetable boards for each station. I stuck my Humberston station names onto the Wills station name boards. I was confused by the station names provided with the Dapol kit. I couldn't tell what they were supposed to be. I tried hard to find information from the kit itself, from Dapol's website and from forums, but drew a blank. Were these names supposed to be waterslide transfers or what? I tried cutting one of the Oakham signs out and immersing it in water. It did not offer to slide off. All that happened was that the paper went soggy and started to fall apart. It turned out that these name signs were actually intended to be peel-off self-adhesive vinyl items. I managed to salvage the one I'd immersed in water with difficulty, as naturally it was hard to peel the sign from the paper or vice versa when the paper had started to fall apart. Still, I managed and got both Oakham signs stuck down onto the boards. If you should use this kit and want to use these names, don't involve water. Just pick at the corner of the sign and peel it off from the backing, and then you can stick it onto the board. I painted the posts for both types of station name boards brown and then glued them to the boards, scraping off the paint at the contact points so the polycement would work. I chose some of the signs provided on the Wills sheet and glued them onto the backings provided, 2 larger and 2 small ones. For the passengers are requested sign, I cut a piece of thick card as backing. I glued a post cut from scrap plastic to the passenger's sign and then glued a piece of piano wire into the post so that I could stick it into the layout. So these were the signs I had at this point. I cut out a few more of the signs from the Wills sheet and just glued them to pieces of card cut to size. I realized that I had another Dapol set, the station accessories set. This came with 2 sprues of unpainted figures, which I put aside for now, and parts for 2 hand trolleys, a power trolley with 2 trailers, several weighing and vending machines, some churns and crates, and a barrel. Here are those items assembled. Not complicated, just popping axles into the carts, gluing on handles, and gluing a couple of parts together for the barrels and crates and some of the machines. I spray painted the lamps and benches in an approximation to LMS Crimson. I felt that fire buckets were a fairly essential feature of stations, so I managed to get this Springfield white metal set, again from British model trains. I was rather disappointed to find that the hooks on the frames were not actually sufficiently well cast as hooks for the buckets to actually hang on them, so it was necessary to glue each bucket to the frame with a superglue. A couple of the buckets also had broken handles when I got them. I did my best with my supergluing, but I couldn't get all of the buckets to really look as though they were hanging evenly. I painted the bases of the Dapol lamps grey. I made bases for the Wills station name signs from strips of card and painted those grey. Here I've done a bunch more painting, spraying the churns silver, the barrel and crates brown, the machines blue, green and red, the trolleys crimson, and the fire buckets and their stands bright red. I also had a Pico set of milk churns. These were cast in plastic of a greyish silver, so they didn't really need painting. I did some more detailing of the items. I printed faces for the weighing machines on my PC printer using basically the same procedure as for the station names. I hand-painted other items, such as the decks and handles of the trolleys. I used a black marker to bring out the Fs on the fire buckets, for which I also made card bases. At this point, everything was about ready to start placing it on the stations. I was a bit nervous about the placement. I figured I'd have to remove the stations from the layout to do it. I figured I'd make the station with the Airfix building more Airfix and the other station more Wills. I did have some other items I wanted to use, a water tower and a water crane and some painted figures. I also had this Hornby Scaledale phone box, which looked nice, although the grids of its doors fell off when I took it out of its packaging. Those grids were made of metal, presumably etched, with sort of shiny dark plastic behind them. The glue fixing them in place didn't hold, and I had to re-glue them with CA. I pulled out 3 more sets of painted figures that I had, and also some Scaledale pillar boxes and some little gas lamps of unknown origin. I've replaced the short red hose on the Hornby water crane with a piece of heat shrink, which I think looks better. So here's the first station pulled from the layout in its bare state, with just the main building and the kiosk. The Airfix kit provided these paper signs, and I used them when first making the building, even though they weren't very good. Now I replaced those Airfix paper signs with items made from the Wills kit, as seen earlier. I also replaced the Airfix sign on the other end of the building, though I'm not really that thrilled with this Wills sign either. But it's better than the original Airfix one, which was just 2-color in yellow and black. I tried the items that I wanted to use on the station. I didn't glue anything at first, as I wanted to experiment until I was happy with the arrangement. Once I'd settled on the arrangement, I did glue everything down, mostly using rocket glue, as I figured it just wouldn't be practical to work with the station with everything just placed loose. I worked from one end to the other, gluing everything in place. As noted, I leant towards Airfix Dapol items for this station, as it had the Airfix building, although I did include some other items. I made little legs from card for the advertising signs, like the Fry's chocolate one seen here. It was actually a problem placing items around the Airfix booking hall building, as it had so many windows and doors that there was hardly any blank wall against which to stand things. Everything is glued down at this point, except for the buildings themselves. Even the churns on the cart are glued in place, because otherwise they would fall off very easily if things were shaken. I named this woman outside the booking hall Eileen, because I just couldn't get her to stand up straight. And here is that station back on the layout. The water tower built from the Airfix kit is beside this station, so I placed the Hornby water crane here, implicitly drawing water from that tower. The station certainly looks a lot more lively now. I was happy enough with the Oakham name for this station. Not really enough light to photograph without flash. Here's the second station moved to the bench to be worked on. Those darn Metcalfe platform edging strips are always peeling off. I did my best to stick the edging strips down with some glue and some extra bits of the stripping. Then, as before, I played around with placing items on the station before gluing anything. I put the water tower at the far end of the platform, as much as anything else, because I couldn't see where else to place it, and it does seem that water towers were sometimes placed like this. I used the green gas lamps on this station, as there were more of them, and I thought they fitted in okay, although perhaps they should have been crimson on an LMS station. Once again I settled on the arrangement and then glued everything down. The Metcalfe, Settle and Carlisle buildings provided more wall space for placing things, including several machines and timetables and posters. I used several figures on this station, including station staff and a couple of agricultural figures. I've also changed the hose on that water tower as well. It came with a fat black stiff thing originally, and I replaced it with a piece of heat shrink tubing, which I thought looked better. I realized when I went to place that station back on the layout that I hadn't taken into account the footbridge when placing things on the station. Previously, this bridge had one of its ends on the end of the platform, although the fit was always rather awkward. I figured I could place it differently by reversing the little platform on the other side of the track and using a new base and a stairway extension on the station side. I used some of the platform fencing from the Dapol set for the stairway extension. I painted the lamps on the bridge whilst I had it off. First I painted them silver, then painted the posts and tops black. I finished the lamps by using a black marker on the frames, as they were very tiny and very difficult to paint. I also glued some figures in place on the bridge. So here is that station back on the layout, now named the Humberston Station. I put the sign about passengers using the bridge at the base of the bridge. I cheated a little bit and placed it so that it could actually be read when looking at the layout. My camera struggles to photograph the layout without flash, even with the brighter lighting I installed. Here's a flash picture showing the whole station and the bridge, and indeed the other station. The two stations are much too close together really, but it's hard to proportion things and space them out on a small 00 gauge layout. Here's a close-up showing the revised bridge with its sign. And here's a general flash view over both stations. Too close together, of course, but it is nice now to see some life on the stations.